Hello, everyone. I am Amanda Fearman, the chair of the Parent Involvement Committee, and I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's event. I would just like to remind everyone that today's session is being recorded. And before we begin, I'd like to share our land acknowledgement. The Hamilton Wentworth District School Board acknowledges our presence on ancestral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee Confederacy land as determined by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. The intent of this agreement is for all nations sharing this territory to do so responsibly, respectfully, and sustainably in perpetuity. We respect the longstanding relationships with the local Indigenous communities, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and the Six Nations of the Grand River. We're pleased to provide this session tonight in what we hope will be a series of opportunities throughout the year on topics of importance to you, the parents of the students of HWDSB. Tonight's session will include two parts. We'll be hearing from the board staff on COVID updates and also about learning and program at HWDSB. There's been a lot of changes for families, and we appreciate that there is a lot of information that parents and guardians are asking to review. At this time, I would like to welcome Dawn Danko, the chair of the board, to bring greetings this evening.
Thank you, Amanda. Welcome everyone to this evening's information session. On behalf of the board, I just want to thank the Parent Involvement Committee for doing this important work and making sure that our families have the information they need. And we think that sessions like this can be another way that families, parents, guardians can get information that can help them best support their students and their learning, achievement, and well-being. And that is one of the important roles of the Parent Involvement Committee. You may be aware that they certainly do consult and provide feedback from a parent perspective to our board on policies, on program, and a number of things. But one of the important roles they have is bringing forward concerns from parents, from families in the community, but also helping parents navigate the system and get the information they need to help support their students and their success. So I hope you glean a lot of good information from the session tonight. Thank you again to the Parent Involvement Committee for organizing this and a number of other sessions this fall, and I'll turn it back to Amanda.
Thank you, Dawn. At this time, I would just like to remind everyone that we are using Microsoft Teams Live tonight. It's a bit different than you may be used to for functionality. At the end of the session, there will be the Q&A questions that were submitted earlier. There is no chat function that we normally see, but the Q&A will be shared at the end. And then I would just like to remind everyone that we are going to be keeping our cameras off when we're not presenting, as well as our microphones muted. At this time, I would like to welcome Laura Romano, Superintendent of Student Achievement, who also has the Public Health Portfolio, as well as Matthew Quan, who is our Manager responsible for COVID-19 health and safety.
Thank you very much, Amanda. I'm actually going to pass this to Associate Director Sue Dunlop to get us started this evening.
Thank you so much, Amanda and Chair Danko, for welcoming us to this session. My name is Sue Dunlop, and as Superintendent Romano, Laura said, I'm the Associate Director of Learning Services. I'm very happy to support today. So just wanted to let you know a few housekeeping items in addition to what Amanda has already shared. If you can add questions as we go in the Q&A, and they will be shared at the question period time. I know the slide says chat, but we are using the Q&A for this session. I wanted to share with everyone the guiding principles that HWDSB has been using this year. And we're really focused on these two principles. Of course, there's other things we work on, but in related to COVID-19, our first guiding principle is safety for all, and our second guiding principle is to remain and maintain in-person learning in schools. We know how important it is for students to be able to learn in person. A little bit of context for everyone. There are a number of ministry documents that we refer to regularly in terms of how to operate schools during this challenging time of the pandemic. And some links are there in the slides as well. So we have the Ontario Ministry Guide to Reopening Schools. And of course, the modified step 2 of the roadmap, which we may refer to later on this evening, because that helps us guide the decisions that we make for schools as well. We also have updated testing and isolation guidelines that were just very recently released in January, just last week, actually. And then going on to the next slide, another couple of documents are our immunization disclosure and testing requirement policy for the Ministry of Education, and then the interim guidance for schools and childcare in terms of Omicron. So once again, these are some ministry documents that we refer to when we're making decisions and operationalizing things that we need to do to keep students and staff safe in schools. Now I'll turn it over to Superintendent Laura Romano and Matthew Quan, as Amanda mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue, and welcome everyone. Although I will be on video this evening, Matthew Quan isn't able to be on video, but he will be providing some input on a number of these slides in his role as Manager of COVID Response. So thank you, Matthew, for joining me this evening. I'm going to start with an overview of the rapid antigen testing. So those tests are tests that are done at home. Results from a rapid antigen test occurs within 15 minutes. So there's no need to go to a lab or to a pharmacy to have that test read. The ministry has provided 2 rapid antigen tests per person as of January. And as parents, you may have remembered that tests were sent home before the holidays as a holiday strategy over the break. So additional tests are coming home this week. Again, we ask that you use those tests if you have a situation where you have a symptomatic student. So someone who is showing symptoms as outlined on the COVID screener. And again, we would ask that those tests are used for symptomatic folks only. The ministry has prioritized delivery of the kits, and you can see the folks who are receiving those kits. So we are waiting for some additional orders as we go through that list of stakeholders. The kits themselves, you probably saw some social media over the weekend in terms of us, our incredible staff, re-kitting and packaging those tests so that we could deliver to 2 kits per family. And again, there are instructions on the board website in terms of how to use those rapid response tests. I think we can move to the next slide. So the second type of test that you might be hearing about are called PCR tests. These tests differ in that these tests need to be taken to a participating pharmacy to be read. So we have a limited number of PCR self-collection kits in our schools right now. They are already there. They are used in a situation where a staff or a student becomes symptomatic during the school day. And in a student's case, the student would be isolating until a parent picks up. In a staff's case, they'd be going home right away. We're able to send that staff or student home with a PCR kit. It's completed at home. The instructions are all included, and they are dropped off at a neighboring participating pharmacy. Again, these kits are voluntary for those who receive them, and results are not shared with the school, but the results would be shared with the family or the staff member who has submitted the test. I think we'll move on to the next slide. This slide talks to the Ministry of Health flowcharts that we've been using as the basis of the information we've been sharing with families. And I think I will turn to Matthew Quan if you want to just speak to the flowcharts and how we've been using them in HWDSB.
Sure, thanks, Laura. These 2 charts were taken from a Ministry of Health document on case, contact, and outbreak management. A lot of the information in this guidance is actually what shaped the daily screening tool. It's a very useful tool for us because this document goes into greater detail, helps some of our administrators and our staff understand some of the requirements that aren't covered so well in the daily screening tool. So public health, before we managed to get a lot of our supporting documents in place as all these changes were happening, we were relying on the flowcharts that were in the guidance document to help us wrap our heads around how the screening has changed, how isolation has changed, how that's going to be impacting our staff and our families.
Thank you, Matthew. We can turn to the next slide. So our own public health unit were able to use that Ministry of Health flowchart to create these two public health flowcharts and decision guides. These are very similar to decision guides that we've seen in the past. They've been updated to reflect the changing state of Omicron and how that has impacted isolation and response. So there are two charts. One is designed for a child who becomes symptomatic at school or daycare. The other one is for a symptomatic child at home. These are posted on our website. Principals use these each and every day to help support and guide parent decisions on supporting their children and determining next steps. So if you haven't seen these two flowcharts, they have been very helpful, and they're the charts we continue to come back to as we support next steps. We can move to the next slide. Vaccine for education workers. We've created a link here to the City of Hamilton Public Health webpage. It's really important to be checking in on these links because clinics are updated each and every day. We work in partnership with public health to support school clinics as required. And currently there are appointments open at the current clinics with walk-ins available. And some of those clinics are dedicated to education workers and those that support educational settings. We try our best to, as we get the information from public health, to continue to communicate with our own community so you have as much up-to-date information as possible. The next slide is a very similar slide in that, but what's different here is our stakeholder group. So again, vaccination for students. There is a website with public health. We continued our partnership with public health in helping to communicate those school clinics. Right now, there are a number of clinics occurring at recreation centers that are very, very close to, or if not connected to some of our elementary schools. So we've helped with some targeted communication here so parents are aware. And we are also looking at working in partnership for some future in-school vaccination clinics that would target our 5 to 11-year-olds. So we have nothing confirmed at this point in time. More information on that will come. We can go to the next slide. Immunization disclosure. So again, as we continue to get information from the ministry, we take direction from them. We are required to collect and report statistical information around the third booster. So we will continue to work with our Human Resources Department in accordance with ministry direction to continue to communicate this information. At this point, fully vaccinated still means 2 vaccines. It has not yet been expanded to include the third booster, and we will continue to work in compliance to that. Next slide, please. Enhanced public health measures. Again, as we have shifted from a case management and the dismissal of cohorts within our schools. And I will say around dismissing of cohorts, we as a senior team have been so appreciative of how parents have responded to those phone calls and to those asks around dismissal. We do know that as Omicron has shifted the landscape, so too has the response provincially, which we take our direction from. So the enhanced safety measures that we have in place right now is active verified screening. That means it's incredibly important for families to take the time to do full screening with students each and every morning. and verify that screening. So in elementary, that may mean putting a signature or your initials on a calendar. At secondary, that may be our students doing their screening and showing staff in the morning that they have passed their screening and need to be in school. So we do follow up with screeners that we do not get in the morning, and that's an important part of this strategy. We continue to encourage staff and students with symptoms to go home. Our isolation rooms continue to be in place in our schools if we're awaiting parents to pick up children. There has been no changes in terms of the wearing of a mask other than the mask itself. And certainly we continue to emphasize respiratory etiquette, physical distancing, and hand hygiene. Let's move to the next slide. I'll speak to this one and then I'll just see if Matthew wants to add anything to this. Certainly from a staff PPE perspective, the ministry is providing staff with the non-fitted N95 masks. Again, we continue with the same protection around eye protection if you are closer than 2 meters. And certainly a choice of mask is available to staff between the medical grade and the N95. Students, board has been providing ministry has been providing boards with the 3-ply cloth masks, and students may continue to wear their own masks as previously allowed. Matthew, did you want to add anything else to this slide from your health and safety hat?
I actually think you covered it really well, Laura. There isn't a lot more to say. I mean, I would mention though that, as we had at the beginning of the previous school year, we took the first delivery of respirators, and we're not, we're still being very careful about the supplies. So they have been making their way to the schools. We're asked to monitor our usage and report back to the ministry so that we can get the correct and secure supplies from them, I should say. I know that our trustees had also put forward a motion on a suggestion or an ask to the ministry as well regarding student masks. So we'll see what comes of that as well.
Thank you, Matthew. Move on to the next slide. So just want to spend a little bit of time talking about reporting and monitoring of school. And we do know that there has been quite a shift from our case management approach. And certainly that shift has created some level of anxiety around change. And we have been supporting staff and parents with a few sort of reminders and ideas in terms of where we're going next as we shift with Omicron. So there's three main points here that I'd like to speak to. The first is that the ministry has something called an absence reporting tool. That is something that our principals will be entering into every single morning. And in that, they collect data around student absence for the day, as well as staff absence. That ministry reporting tool, their ministry's plan is that will go live as of Monday, and any parent can access that tool to determine what the attendance rate is looking like at their particular elementary or secondary school. We will have on the HWDSB website a link so that you can access that anytime that you want. So that's one piece of the reporting and monitoring puzzle. The next piece is one that you may have been hearing in the media, which is a 30% threshold around reporting to public health. So we continue to work with public health to operationalize this. We will be collecting information from principals if in fact we pass a threshold determined by public health. We believe that'll be 30%. And we will be doing our due diligence and compliance by reaching out to public health to make them aware. We, of course, would take any direction from public health around any additional measures that might be necessary as a result of that. And the third piece is a very new piece that we're working through right now, and more information will be distributed tomorrow. We are looking at a method in which staff or parents, if they did have a positive PCR or a rapid antigen test and chose to share that information with the school, we're looking at how to operationalize that in such a way that parents would be aware. Again, we would not be sending home cohorts, but we're trying our best to support the fact that parents have asked for information to be posted. Certainly this came through a notice of motion as well on Monday night at our board meeting. So we're doing our best to try to operationalize that in such a way that supports that request, protects privacy of our stakeholders, and is as transparent as possible. So more information about that will be coming out tomorrow. And again, we're looking at starting that process as of next week. So excited to see what will come of that in terms of being as responsive and transparent as we can. So I believe that's the last of our slides. So I will take a pause right now, and I will wait for the moderator to walk us through some of the questions.
Nick, can I ask you if you can publish those questions and moderate that? I don't believe with live I have that ability.
Sure thing. Yeah, there should be some in the Q&A section in the published, so I can read one out right now. So the first question would be, are students doing remote learning because of COVID concerns considered absent or in attendance?
So I think we'll perhaps hold that one until the second part of the presentation, because it does talk, the slides in the second part of the presentation does talk about the options, as well as what's coming up in terms of programming for students. So can we hold that one, and perhaps if we could look for questions at this point that are specific to public health measures, that might be helpful, because I think some of those other questions will be answered in the second half.
Sure thing, no problem. So we do have one that's more specific to COVID and public health. So this question is, can you comment on whether HWDSB will be reporting positive cases to public health and or dismissing entire cohorts, as other school boards have indicated that they will?
So great question. We will be following ministry and public health direction and not dismissing cohorts at this time. However, the last initiative that I talked to in the last slide is a strategy where we can capture parents and staff who want to self-report that they have a positive test result. And we will be posting those on school websites. So again, more information about that will come tomorrow. It will be voluntary for those who choose to self-report. Again, we would not be able to confirm that it is a true COVID case because public health will not be involved in that process. But we will be able to post that there was a self-reported positive test.
Awesome, thank you. So I'll stick with the topic here since this one is related. Another question is, if parents choose to share a positive result, what steps, if any, will the school take?
So very much in line with the strategy that I'm talking about. It will be a conversation with the principal if the parent chooses to share that information. And we will be posting what we can And again, not sharing names, privacy is of utmost attention to us, but we will try our best to capture, for example, the class that the positive case came in contact with, possible buses that the positive student or the staff with a positive test came in contact with, etc.
Okay, and there are a few questions coming in about HEPA units and HEPA filters. So just to summarize all three, will every classroom get a HEPA unit? And where can we find more information about ventilation and HEPA units?
So there is a slide upcoming around ventilation. I see Sue has jumped on. Sue, did you want to respond to that?
Thanks, Laura. I was actually going to say exactly that there is a slide coming up around ventilation, so I'll do my best to address those questions during that slide that's in the next section.
Thank you. Is there another question?
I can jump in. It's Sean McKillop here. I see a question here about how about mask exemptions. I'm concerned knowing several students in my son's class, grade 1 class, do not wear masks.
So I'll respond, and then Matthew, from your health and safety perspective, if you'd like to add anything, please jump in. So mask exemptions, again, we do take direction from public health as well as the ministry. There is not a requirement for a medical note for a mask exemption for children. I will say that we have been very surprised with the limited number of mask exemptions at the school board. But we do need to respect the family decision as well as the process that we have in place. Matthew, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, this is also a question that comes up quite often. We've had this question a number of times, and usually it circles back to around why we don't require the medical note. This is something that we've discussed with public health on a few occasions, and a couple of the reasons were that one, there was a concern that it's an equity issue, as doctor's notes covering this are usually not covered under OHIP, so it is an out-of-pocket expense for some people. The other was a concern that it would overload the medical or the healthcare system. So there are great demands right now on the healthcare system, and this was something that they were hoping to avoid, having thousands of parents try to get appointments with their doctors to get medical notes, especially when that requirement doesn't exist in other parts of the province with respect to exceptions. So to be consistent with that, to reduce the burden on the healthcare system, and for an equity through an equity lens, I think would be some of the key points.
Thanks, Matthew.
Okay, we have a question that is in the published section here of the Q&A. Can you please talk about the school-based vaccine clinics and maybe a little bit about how they will operate?
Sure. So the ministry has talked about school-based clinics. We have had a history of school-based clinics that have been based in our secondary schools. Those clinics ran all of last year. The way that those clinics ran is they would start just before dismissal time, and they would run into the evening, and we'd also run those on the weekend. As we start to pivot to more school-based clinics for elementary, we have just started our initial conversations with public health about what that would look like. It is important to note that students getting the pediatric vaccine, so 5 to 11, do require parental consent for that to happen. There is a consent form that would have to be filled out. And right now we're just in the initial stages to determine timing for clinics, after school clinics, weekend clinics, for example, that would be based out of our elementary schools. So again, initial planning has started on that. One of the good news pieces is that the clinic that public health would be running as we host them in one of our buildings, they have indicated that if parents accompanied students, they would also be able to get vaccine at that point in time. So they're being very accommodating, and we will be in a position where we will be hosting them within our buildings. More information will come on those as we hear from public health what their plan is moving forward.
Okay, we have a question about the N95 and KN95 masks for school staff. Just a question about if school staff will be wearing them every day now. That's the question. Will school staff be wearing the N95 masks every day now?
School staff have the option of the medical grade mask or the N95 mask. We're just working through process right now in terms of what staff choice is around those two masks. But yes, the expectation is masking every day.
Okay, another question that goes back to case management and reporting. So hi there, thank you for the session. How long will it take between self-reporting and alerting parents and students?
So again, we are operationalizing this, and more information will be out tomorrow, but our initial plan would be that as a principal receives a report at the end of each day, they would be able to post on their school website any reports received that day. Again, that information will simply be a self-report from a parent or a staff member if they choose to do so. So there'll be no information in terms of period of communicability based on that report, because we will not have that information from public health. They're no longer supporting that process. Sean or Nick, any other questions?
I'll jump in. I'm not sure if there's a lag, so happy to support. When a cohort is having a break and eating maskless, is there monitoring to ensure they are maintaining appropriate distance while maskless?
So the lunchtime protocols haven't changed. They've been the same all along around students staying in their desk during lunchtime. Our students have gone through a number of training sessions and reminders around what lunchtime behavior and needs to look like. I would say that some of them are most compliant, and they are supervised as they normally are during lunchtime.
Okay, and Laura, we do have another question about vaccination clinics in schools. So the vaccination clinics in elementary schools, will these be communicated in advance, the plan and the dates, or will they be a pop-up / surprise in the schools?
They definitely will not be a pop-up. Again, a reminder that students 5 to 11 do need parental consent or guardian consent for vaccine to occur. So part of the public health plan will be a communication plan that our team will assist with to ensure that parents are aware of times and locations and process.
I'll just jump in. There's a few questions about the mandatory vaccine requirement for staff. Just in terms, I've been responding to a few questions here about that, pointing to our website. I'm just wondering if you might be able to share a little bit more about that requirement from the ministry.
So there is a process that is led by our Human Resources Department. There is a disclosure of vaccine by staff, and there is for those who do not have vaccine, there is a expectation of testing 3 times a week, and that is reported directly to Human Resources. So that is consistent with the ministry direction around vaccine.
This one is more of a public health specific question, but when will students get their COVID-19 booster?
That is a good question that I actually don't have an answer for. That would be determined by both ministry and public health. So we're just watching as the announcements come and as the window opens for more and more vaccine to occur. So we do know that there are walk-in clinics within Hamilton for those who are 18 and above. So we will be awaiting, just as you are, information on boosters for younger children.
Thanks, Laura. I'm seeing another one just about recognizing that being outdoor significantly decreases the risk of transmission. I was wondering if there are any additional measures or supports being offered to teachers or schools to help with just any measures for outdoor learning or being outside to mitigate any transmission.
Yeah, another great question, and I would ask that Bill perhaps in his section talks to some of the programming ideas that have been shared. I think we've learned a significant amount around different and creative strategies to meet the needs of children, to have breaks, things like that. So he might be able to speak to some of the programming ideas around that. Sorry about that.
So a couple questions have come through about the rapid tests. So 2 is not too many. Is there a plan to acquire and distribute more rapid tests?
Yeah, we believe that's the ministry's plan at this point in time. There's been 2 waves. The first wave was just before the holidays, and for students that was a test, a kit of 5 tests. And this week an additional 2 were distributed. So we will be taking our lead from the ministry in terms of next steps as additional shipments arrive. I will say that the PCR tests that are in schools, again, those are for students or staff that become symptomatic during the day. Those are of limited quantity. So we are not expecting additional PCR kits.
This might be more of a program question, but just at a very general level, what if a student has to stay at home, must they complete work virtually?
Yeah, I think we'll get that's certainly embedded in the second part of the presentation. So between Bill and Sue, they'll address different types of options.
So Laura, I'm going to jump in and I have a question here. Are we combining cohorts in event of staff shortages?
So that is an option that is available to us. We have been communicating with principals as we problem solve potential staff shortages. So the guidance document does provide some flexibility there. What we would expect to see is perhaps a larger space, for example, a library, where we could combine 2 cohorts of students with as much physical distancing as possible between the cohorts. So we have walked through with principals different options. If there is a staff shortage, then the decision to do so would be done in collaboration between the principal as well as the superintendent as we problem solve a site-based decision.
Next question, Laura, are staff allowed to wear their own N95 masks?
Yes, that was a decision, I believe in December. I'll ask Matthew to speak to this one, that was an option for staff at that time, and I do believe that's still in place. Matthew, can you speak to that one?
Yes, we sent out an all staff message when the N95 masks were first made available or announced by the province. If people at that time wanted to wear their own, as long as it was off of the Health Canada or NIOSH approved lists, we would allow for it. We haven't changed that position. We continue to allow it. And again, that's an option for staff. They don't have to do so.
Next question is, what are the symptoms, that symptom list? I know it comes through the screening, but there is a specific question around what symptoms are, if certain symptoms are present, what can, I'm not expressing myself very well, I apologize. Let me just read it again. I'm going to read the actual question. What are the symptoms with which I can send my child to school? Last year, runny nose or dry cough were okay to send them. So that's a question around that.
Yeah, so I'm going to refer you to one of the slides had the 2 decision guides that Public Health has created, and they are fantastic. Those decision guides will help you make decisions at home. They help us make decisions at school. So the decision guide speaks to if your child becomes ill at home with any of the following symptoms: fever and or chills, cough or barking cough, croup, shortness of breath, decrease or loss of taste or smell, or, and here's where they've defined sort of two groups of symptoms here, 2 or more of the following symptoms: sore throat, extreme fatigue, muscle aches, joint pain, headache, runny nose, nasal congestion, and or GI symptoms such as nausea, vomiting, and or diarrhea. So when you look at that decision chart, you're looking at if there's something from that first list, which would include fever, things like fever, cough, barking cough, shortness of breath, or in the second list, 2 of those symptoms. So if they did have nasal congestion, for example, that you'd be looking for another one of the symptoms within that list to keep them home. So we do know that it's gotten a little bit more complicated with Omicron, and certainly those decision guides are your first, I'd say, starting point in terms of making those decisions. Matthew, did you want to add anything to that from a health and safety perspective?
I think one of the key differences is that the screening tool will walk you through this. If you identify just a single symptom that's considered a minor symptom, like runny nose, it will show that you failed the screening, but you'd have to carefully look at the instructions that follow because it is new, and because you have one minor symptom, it does ask you to stay home for between 24 and 48 hours until symptoms have been shown to be improving. If you had 2 minor symptoms, it would go as Laura would suggest, and through the isolation route. So that is a pretty big difference. It also does impact household members differently. A single minor symptom does not require the entire household to isolate.
Thanks, Matthew. Appreciate that. And again, as much as the decision chart is helpful, the screener is when we have questions from principals and staff is what we continue to reflect back on. The screener has been created by the province, and I think really taking your time to walk through each one of those steps every morning, it will guide you through the decision and your next steps. So I'm conscious of the time. I'm looking, it's just past 7:15, and I do want to honor space for Associate Director Sue Dunlop and Superintendent Bill Torrens' presentation. I would suggest that if there are still questions that we haven't answered from a public health perspective, certainly we will continue to work with the team to answer those questions in the Q&A that will be shared later. And as well, I think some of the questions, I haven't been able to see in the chat very well because I'm presenting, but some of the questions are answered in the second half. So to Sue and to Bill, I think I'll pass on to you. Sorry, Amanda, if I'm supposed to return to you. I do apologize.
Thanks, Laura. I have a little bit of a lag with my unmuting function right now. I just want to thank Superintendent Romano and Matthew Quan for the presentation tonight, and hope that it was informative for parents. I also want to just thank Nick Benner and Sean McKillop for stepping in to help moderate the session. Technology does not always cooperate, and I could not see the Q&A window for some reason on my screen. It was just spinning. At this time, we're going to move to supporting the learning at HWDSB with updates from Sue Dunlop, Associate Director of Student Services that we've met earlier, and Bill Torrens, Superintendent of Program.
Thank you, Amanda. So we're actually going to start off with ventilation. There were a number of ventilation questions, and then we will move into more information around learning. So for ventilation, we know this is a topic of great interest to everyone. Just want to remind you that every school's ventilation system was inspected in the fall of 2020, and on the board website, there are detailed reports about each school's ventilation. We want to let you know that schools fall into 3 tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, depending on the kind of ventilation systems they have. Tier 1 being full mechanical ventilation and tier 3 being no mechanical ventilation. And we wanted to let you know that for tier 3 schools that have no mechanical ventilation, there is a HEPA, we call it a filter, but it's actually an air purifier in every single classroom and shared space in those schools. And so you can find out which tier your school is in on the board website if you search under ventilation. We also have, we want you to know that air flushing continues daily, and what that means is that for 2 hours before staff or students come into the school, the air exchange is going, and that happens every single day. In addition, there are some major projects in terms of ventilation. They're with the acronym CVRIS, and 17 of 30 of those are complete, and the remainder are still in process. If those are to improve the ventilation in various schools, and while those projects continue in schools, classrooms that are the subject of those projects have a HEPA air purifier in them. We also wanted to let you know that the HEPA filters purify up to about 1,000 square feet of spaces. Most classrooms are approximately 750 square feet. So we're not suggesting there would need to be more than one HEPA filter in every classroom, in a learning space or a classroom. Another common question that comes forward is, how long do the filters actually last in those air purifiers? They last about 12 months, and facility staff on site monitor those regularly. Now, just before we go on, I did want to address a couple of the questions that came through around HEPA filters, because that was flagged as something that was of interest to people. So I've already talked about where the HEPA filters go, and we do suggest that in some cases, if classrooms can have windows open, that's certainly suggested. When it's cold, that can be difficult, and that's why in those tier 3 schools that don't have any air exchange, that mechanical ventilation, we do have a HEPA filter in every classroom and shared space. So I'm going to go on to the next slide and turn it over to Superintendent Bill Torrance, our Superintendent of Program.
Thanks, Sue, and good evening, everyone. I'm starting tonight's presentation, talking a little bit about remote learning. As many of you are aware, we currently have open until 9 o'clock tonight a parent portal survey, providing an opportunity for parents to choose to have their children join the remote learning program for the rest of the school year. It is not a transition in terms of students moving back and forth, but students really moving from in-person learning to remote learning, as I said, for the rest of the year. We're not reorganizing classrooms. We may, if there are more students transitioning than spaces currently in the remote program, we may add staff, but we're not making any changes to in-person classrooms at this time. In secondary, we're also providing an opportunity for students to move to a full remote model for semester 2, starting on the 3rd of February. We do that through our e-learning program. So families or students who are 18 or over who are interested in doing that are asked to go to their student services departments to get an appointment with their guidance counselor, make sure that they're aware of that desire, and we will work hard to ensure you have a timetable of fully e-learning classes. We have already added staff due to demand from students, and we'll continue to monitor and look at that throughout the next 2 weeks. I will note that, again, like elementary, transitioning to full-time remote in secondary for second semester really has you in that e-learning model for the entire semester all the way to the end of June. There's a limited opportunity to move in both programs to move back to in-person only with absolutely extraordinary circumstances. There is not a planned transition point for elementary or any real opportunity to transition back in secondary. If we could move ahead a slide, please. Currently, we are offering short-term virtual learning, both in elementary and secondary. The purpose of this is to allow parents to have an opportunity to keep their students at home until they feel comfortable in returning to school, which we hope is quite soon. For secondary students, this is really a temporary measure or short-term measure up to the start of the next semester, as I just mentioned. I will note that for both elementary and secondary students, we ask that parents do contact the school, make the school aware of the desire for short-term virtual learning, and then the students will be marked as temporarily excused from class, although class and learning will continue, but temporarily excused, and therefore you will not receive attendance calls every day for having a child who's absent. That also makes us aware of who's home for the purpose of short-term virtual learning, and also for who is home due to absence due to illness or another reason. In the elementary model specifically, it is an asynchronous program. Every Monday morning, we do post learning packages on our Learn at Home site on our main website here at HWDSB. We also have paper packages if required within schools. Those provide 5 days of learning for our students and really do need some parent support for our youngest students to engage with, of course, but are really designed to learn at home independently. We do not have one-to-one support provided through this. We do have a broadcast option, what we will call a broadcast option, beginning next Monday, where at the beginning of the day there will be an educator broadcasting like we are right now, providing instructions in terms of what the day's learning looks like, and using the chat function like we are right now in just answering questions specific to the what the activity, making sure there's an understanding of the activity. Teams Live has a translation function and captioning that we can use also to make it accessible to our families for whom English is a second language, to provide that accessibility. So that's really important to us. Currently, our plan is to provide this option until February 18th. We will make an assessment prior to the 18th to see if we need to continue or not, but our planning goes forward to that date at this time. Pardon me for one moment. The next slide, please. Secondary short-term virtual learning is provided to students through their classroom teacher. So as I mentioned, parents will indicate if they're taking this option, make the school aware, or the student if he or she is 18 years older, of age or older. But what we'll be using in this case is what we call the continuity of learning model. So like a student who would be isolating due to COVID or off due to illness, the learning for the student would continue, who's on short-term virtual learning in secondary, would continue. Materials will be posted to the hub for the student to download and complete, and they can be returned and dropped back for marking for assessment back to the teacher. The teacher will also be in contact with the students throughout the process. So there isn't full instruction to students. Students are really working quite independently and very much an asynchronous model again, but they do have access to their learning and can continue and have a successful end to their semester. And I just do want to underline that that is very much the model we use both in elementary and secondary when students are at home isolating, and that is we stay connected to the home classroom teacher, have as much of the learning as possible sent home, connected home, for the student to complete. So when they do return, then they can pick up as close to where they left off and have their learning as close as possible to where their class is at that time. If we could move ahead, please, by a slide. I do want to share some information around our plans for semester 2. Semester 2 starts on February 3rd, and we are moving to a model where we're going back to our traditional 4-period model. Some schools are 5-period, but 4-period model for secondary school for the entire semester. We will no longer be using the quadmester model. There is a possibility that we would have to use an alternate week model if directed to do so, and that would be seem like the quadmester because it would be one class in the morning and one class in the afternoon. What we would do is have students take an alternate week, an alternate 2 sets of classes. So for instance, periods 1 and 2 would be on week 1, periods 3 and 4 would be on week 2, and then we would alternate back and forth. So want to assure parents we're moving back to a semestered model, and we are have a contingency plan if need be to move to, rather than a quadmester, to an alternate week model. If we could move forward by a slide, please. I do want to provide an update in terms of grade 9 EQAO mathematics at this time. We have decided that the HWDSB is not participating in this assessment for quadmester 2 only. We did in quadmester 1, and we plan to do so again in semester 2. but we've decided at this time we want to focus on a successful completion of the quadmester itself and use the next 6 instructional days before Student Success Days to focus on instruction, getting all of our key learning completed, and the culminating activities that contribute to a student's final mark. Not participating in the EQAO assessment will not have an adverse impact on any student's marks, and there should not be any concern in terms of that. If I could ask us to move forward one more slide. And I also want to provide an update on our Student Success Days. So Student Success Days are what we've used to really replace our exam days since the end of June of 2020. Sorry, my apologies. Through all the previous school year and into this, and this is an opportunity for all students to participate in activities that could either have them earn the credit if they're not in a position to pass, or have them improve their mark. In both cases, students would be working closely with their classroom teachers, who will work with them to determine what those assessments, meaning a task or an assignment, or other tasks or performances, perhaps depending on the subject, they would need to complete to earn the credit or improve their mark. We found this to be quite successful in the previous quadmester with and the previously last year with our student success rate in terms of earning credits rising above 90%. So we were very happy to do so. We did do this year, we have returned in some subject areas, providing educators with an opportunity to have an exam as part of the student's final mark. And we continue to provide that opportunity. So there may be some of our students who do have an exam that would occur just prior to Student Success Days. So that would likely be towards the end of next week. And with that, I believe I am turning things back to Associate Director Dunlop.
Thank you, Bill. Could we have the next slide, please? One of the things that we wanted to share with you was around supports for students' mental health. We know this is a concern as we make our way through this ongoing pandemic. And so we just wanted to highlight some of the mental health supports that we have so far, and then also what is going to be coming up. We have a great resource for teachers and educators called Reimagining Wellness, with a number of really good lessons. That there's a menu of lessons that teachers can choose from, teachers and classroom educators, and it's all grades, and we're encouraging teachers to revisit those, especially with the return to in-person learning. We also use, we have emotion coaching for staff, which really helps staff work with students who may be feeling anxious or fearful, and just helps them, kind of empathize with them. And we also have a number of student and parent groups to support through our social work services. We found that through this year, there have been a lot of comments and concerns come from parents around separation anxiety for their children. And so social work services is going to be expanding those parent groups to focus on separation anxiety. In addition, and more information will be coming out about that to schools and to families. And social work services is also launching a parent guide, which will include the upcoming information around student mental health groups, information around those parent caregiver mental health workshops, such as the separation anxiety one that's referenced above, those key mental health recourses for students, and also resources for parents and caregivers. And I'm sorry, I think that's a typo in the slide. It should say resources, not recourses for students. Next slide, please. And we've come to the end of our section around work in schools. And so we're moving to the question portion, and I think we can start taking questions now. So I'm going to ask Superintendent Torrance to come back on, Bill, if you could. And we may call on Superintendent Romano or Matthew Quan as well, if there's some questions related to public health that are still coming through. One of the first, go ahead.
Sorry, I wondered if I should answer the question regarding outdoor education that came in the previous section to start. And I think it was an excellent question, and it really spoke to the importance of spending time learning outside. We do encourage our educators to find time to go outside. There's some really great ideas about making reminders in terms of doing that and providing some professional development that certainly we can take away. But I do want to assure you that educators are encouraged to spend time outside. We know that secondary classes, for instance, often take an outdoor break during the course of their 150 minutes during the quadmester, which isn't really fully learning outside, of course, but speaks to the importance of getting our students outside. And we'll look at ways through the program division that we can support more learning outside come the spring. So thank you for that question.
So Bill, just a clarification question around students who have to isolate. I know you did cover in the slides a little bit. Will they be sent daily work to keep up with the class, and will they have support if assistance is required?
Yeah, again, thank you for that clarification, Associate Director Dunlop. Certainly connecting with the classroom teacher is vital when it comes to having a child at home. Having materials come home or having enough learning to continue learning for the days of isolation is really important to have happen. If there's some support needed, again, that happens in conversation and collaboration with the classroom teacher. So I encourage any parents in that situation to please be sure to have a conversation with their classroom teacher, make sure there's clarity on how learning materials will get back to home, be it email or posted on one of our platforms like MS Teams or the Hub, or if there's something that needs to be picked up at home. I think that's where the conversation really should start, and depending on the needs of your child, then the appropriate supports will be put in place.
Thanks, Bill. Next question in the Q&A is, my school told me the form I completed for temporary learning was only good for 5 days. Should I contact them to confirm February 18th?
No, you should be able to continue simply under that initial form. We haven't asked the schools to, we have not asked the schools to make that change within 5 days. So we'll make sure that that's communicated out. You've stated your intention, so please just continue with, continue as you are.
Thank you, Bill. And I'll just add that it does depend on whether you're a secondary or elementary student. So keep in mind that elementary, the short-term virtual learning option for elementary is until February 18th if needed, although students can return to school at any time. For secondary, the temporary, or rather the short-term virtual learning option is just for the remainder of Quad 2. And if students are looking for a remote learning option, they would go into e-learning at that time. The next question is around asymptomatic testing. So I'm going to skip over that one just for now, and we'll come back to it because that would have been part of the public health section. The next question is, will cohorts always be the default, or is it possible there would be a move to remote learning as a result of shortages? And I'll take a stab at answering that question first. So first of all, we are making every effort to cover absences. We know that there may be a higher volume of absences with Omicron, both from the staff and student side. So we are monitoring absences very closely in schools every evening and every morning, and if necessary, deploying internal staff to cover classes and to continue the learning, or system staff to do that. And we've been doing that for the past couple of days. So we certainly don't want to have to move to remote learning as a result of staff shortages. It is possible that might happen. It happened last year with a school where because of the high volume of staff who were absent, we simply couldn't continue in-person learning, and we had to go to remote learning at that time. If that was to happen, we would be informing parents with as much time as possible so that they would be able to make the necessary arrangements. And of course, the other option too might happen that it's possible, because it has happened through the past 18 months, that the Chief Medical Officer of Health for Ontario might again direct schools into remote learning. That's not something we have any control over, and that's another case where we might have to move to remote learning. The next question in the Q&A is, will the number of students switching to remote and the short-term virtual learning option be published? And I'll turn to Bill for that question.
No, thanks for that, Sue. We'll certainly provide the number of students moving to remote learning, and as we have fairly accurate tracking of that. I would have to take away if we're able to do that for short-term virtual, but certainly if we're able to, we would be providing that.
Thank you, Bill. The next question in the Q&A is, will there be any chance to switch to remote learning later again for some special cases maybe? And I know Bill can answer this, but I can also answer it, so I'll go ahead. We do have an exceptional circumstances process. So if circumstances change in a family and there are some exceptional circumstances to be considered, you can make an application to move either from remote back to regular in-person learning or move to remote. So that option has existed since the fall. Did I capture that okay for you, Bill?
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks. Next question in the Q&A is, do you recommend that parents send updates to the child's teachers with learning activities taking place at home for elementary? I'm assuming that's for the short-term virtual learning option. Do you want to go ahead with that one, Bill?
Yeah, thanks, Sue. Certainly feel free to do so. There's not a strong connection between the learning packages and what's happening within your child's classroom, but it is valuable information, of course, for the teacher. Completely not required. Please do not think that that's something we're asking all parents to do, but if you do have a line of communication open with the teacher, they'll be glad to hear how one of their students is doing.
The next question is, have you made, does the model for semester 2 involve alternating between in-person and remote learning, or is it just alternating classes all in person? So maybe you could just provide some clarity around what semester 2 could look like.
And thanks. Great question for clarification. So our plan right now is to start semester 2 in the model we're all familiar with, which would be 4 classes a day or 4 periods a day for students. It's only if we're required to, will we move to an alternate week format, and that alternate week format would be fully in person as well. So students would be attending in person 2 periods a day, as they do right now at HWDSB. But what we would be doing is they would be carrying a full course load and then alternate those classes every other week. So I just want to reiterate that our semester model in secondary is an in-person model unless you're in e-learning. We're hoping to have a normal semester model of 4 periods a day for students, and if not, we'll go to the alternate model, but they will be all in person.
Thank you, Bill. The next question I think was answered already, so I'm going to have you made parents aware if their children's classroom does not currently have a HEPA filter. So I'll try to answer that question as best I can. The way to find out about what the school that your child attends and the classrooms are to check the board website for the ventilation reports. Ventilation reports for each school are on there. They're part of, there's a large chart or table that you can look at, and there are links in there. You can go in and see the inspection report. And in those reports, it says whether the school is tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. If your school is tier 3, then every classroom and if every learning and shared space has a HEPA air purifier. If it's tier 1, that means they have full mechanical ventilation, so HEPA filters are not needed. And for tier 2, which could be a mix of them, you will see more information about each space. So that's the best way to find that out, and that information is published and has been published since the fall. Next question, and is around remote learning again. Is, are students doing remote learning because of COVID concerns considered absent or in attendance? And the answer is neither. So the temporary excusal form does excuse your child from attending school, and so they will not be marked absent. They will use a code that's a G code, so they're not considered absent, but they're also not considered in attendance. They are temporarily excused from school. Just checking for any more questions. How can my child who is not in secondary school transition from remote learning to in-person learning? Will we get a form to fill out? Do we go to the parent portal? Do we call the school? Do you want to go ahead, Bill?
Yeah, so Sue, just clarify, so that's a student in an elementary school right now?
Yes, it says, how can my child not secondary? So yes, elementary.
Okay, and so if you do have an interest in moving your child from remote learning to in-person learning right now, please contact your principal. We are only doing transitions, as Sue mentioned, in extraordinary circumstances. So we do have a process and some criteria in terms of that transition. So please contact your child's principal, and they'll guide you through that process. And I will just say, in terms of why we make limited transitions and why we're asking families to make a choice to remote for the rest of the year, is we really learned last year that as consistent a process and as consistent as a learning experience, staying in the same class, staying connected to the same students, and staying in the same format was really beneficial for many students last year. So students who had moved back and forth didn't have the same necessarily the same positive experience around learning last year, and we really want to ensure that we provide that high quality education and consistent learning experience for our students.
Thank you, Bill. The next question is another HEPA air purifier question. Will there be HEPA filters in shared spaces, for example, gym or washroom? So the HEPA air purifiers will be in shared spaces in tier 3 schools and in some tier 1 spaces, depending on what kind of ventilation there is. So once again, you can find that information on the board website under ventilation and look at the chart for your school. Next question. Will elementary schools accept volunteers from parents of the students with the same cohort to help with staffing that may occur, such as monitoring during breaks, lunch, if teachers need time to perform class-related work during the day? So thank you for that question. I'll go ahead and answer it. We are employing a number of strategies to assist with managing a potentially high absence rate, as I mentioned earlier. One of those is that we are making sure that our occasional staff lists are really robust, and looking at using teachers who in Teachers College, as well as the Ministry of Education has said. So we're in the process of that. Right now, we are limiting visitors to school in accordance with Step 2 of the Ontario Reopening Act and plan, so that only essential volunteers will come in. And there are a lot of logistical and operational, as well as privacy and training issues around having volunteers do supervision. And so right now we are going to limit that to staff in terms of supervision, but thank you for the question. Just waiting to see if there's any more questions for this area. So the next question is, will we get a confirmation from the principal or school after submission of a filled-in excusal form? So in order to get the temporary excusal form, you need to speak with the principal or vice principal at the school, and they will get you the form, and then you will submit it directly to them. So that's where the confirmation should come. Next question is, if cohorts are combined, would caregivers be notified? So thank you for that question. That was a question that Laura answered a little bit earlier around cohorting and are we going to do it? And we would only do it in an emergency situation and for a very short term. And yes, we have directed principals that if cohorts are combined in a large space, still with distance between them, then caregivers, parents, guardians should be notified of that. We're going to, if that had to happen, it would be in a large space and there would be distance between them as well. And I see that Sean, the moderator, has let us know there are only 10 minutes remaining. So if you have any more questions, now's the time to do it.
So I see a question about post February 18th and if there's an opportunity to transition to in-person or remote learning for elementary students. And so I do want to reiterate, our students in elementary short-term virtual learning are more than welcome to return back to their home school at any time, whenever you feel comfortable. February 18th is a date we've set to assess the program. So it's a time that we may continue afterwards to still provide some of that short-term temporary learning. What I would say about shifting to a full-time remote program at any time after February 18th, that again would use that extraordinary circumstance process. So you would actually make a request to do so, and we would assess that through that process.
Next question is, remote learning is neither. Does this artificially impact the 30% absence criteria? Laura, I'm going to ask if you are still, I think you're still on, if you could come on and just talk a little bit about that 30% threshold that you're discussing with public health.
Mm-hmm. And we are still in conversation with public health around that. And the question posed is one of the criteria we're looking at in terms of establishing, in a sense, a clear denominator. So what's our starting point in terms of students who are connected physically to a school? So for example, we do know that in elementary, our remote classes are connected to physical schools, although the students aren't attending. So we're just working through some logistics in terms of pulling out a true number from an attendance perspective, so that we can be as accurate as possible when we are reporting.
Thank you, Laura. Next question is, when ending the short-term virtual learning before February 18th and deciding to return to in-person, what's the procedure to return to school? Any forms to be filled? Who should we notify? Please clarify. So thank you for that question. Because the short-term virtual learning option is a temporary excusal that the parent actually signs and then the principal will sign, you can return to school at any time. All it would take is a phone call to the principal or an email to the principal to let them know that your child is ready to return to in-person learning, and they can come back that very day or the next day. So, and then the temporary excusal will be finished and that form will be over and you will return to the same class as before. So just looking to see if there's another question in the time remaining. Next question. This is around vaccination. And so, Laura, I'll be asking you to weigh in again. Knowing vaccination is key to protecting our communities, can you speak to how HWDSB is protecting students who are not yet eligible for vaccination, JK students, that 2017 cohort?
Mm-hmm. And we've heard that concern before as we progress through this. Again, we look at the enhanced public health measures that we've been given from public health and from the province, and we ensure that those are in place in all of our classrooms. And certainly working with our smallest learners, who happen to have been some of our most compliant learners, I have to say, in terms of mask wearing. We know that we need to be extra diligent in those classrooms as well, in terms of reminders and monitoring of appropriate mask wearing. Thanks.
So I'm just checking to see if there are any further questions.
So I did see a question around other employee groups accessing N95 masks, as well as rapid antigen testing. So certainly our other employee groups that are working with students, so occasional teachers, for example, would have access to an N95 mask. At this point in time, we are still waiting for all of the rapid antigen tests. However, a occasional teacher, if like any other staff, develop symptoms during the day, we would be able to support them with a PCR test as they left.
And I just wanted to clarify too, Laura, I think there might be some confusion around the PCR test because they're given to students or staff who are symptomatic at school. The intent is they take the test home and do the test at home, but they're given the test at school, correct?
That's correct. So it is a test they're sent home with. They complete the test at home, and then it is dropped off at a participating pharmacy, and there's an instruction sheet that goes home with parents or staff with a link that will provide you with the closest participating pharmacy that would be able to read that test and do the lab. And then again, if you've put your public health, your health card number in the information that you submit to the pharmacy, you will get, if you go online, you'll be able to see those results. Again, just a reminder, those results aren't communicated to our own public health unit, nor are they communicated to the school. So that is the reason that we're looking at the voluntary submission of positive results if both staff or students and families are aware of them. Certainly encouraged from a communication point of view, but voluntary for folks to let the school know that they have been in receipt of a positive test.
I think at this time we're conscious of everyone's time and the fact that it's close to 8 p.m. So we're just going to wrap things up. First of all, I just wanted to say that I hope that all of the parents and caregivers out there that joined us tonight found this information session informative and were able to get questions answered that maybe they had that haven't been easily addressed. Our hope is to have future information sessions that are relevant to parents of the broader community. When you join committees such as the Parent Involvement Committee or your local school council, you get a little more insight into the functioning of the board and the education of our children. So I'd encourage anyone that joined tonight, if you are passionate about learning and helping improving things for your children in their education journey, to look into joining your local school council. At this time of the school year, you can join as a member of the public at any meeting. But if you're interested in helping make a difference early in the school year, you can join as a voting member on your school councils. You can also reach out to us at the Parent Involvement Committee mailbox if you ever have questions about getting more involved. The email address for that is pic@hwdsb.on.ca. So at this time, I would like to thank the board staff for the presentation tonight and all of the assistance they gave with us holding this information session. Some of the future topics that we're hoping to have information sessions on for the parents are human rights and equity with a focus on anti-racism, anti-oppression, and anti-colonial learning. We're hoping to have that sometime in March or early April. And the other topic of great interest is safe schools with a focus on the Safe Schools Action Plan. Look for that to hopefully be held sometime around May or early June. So I would like to thank all of the parents that joined tonight and anyone watching this in the future. Being engaged in our children's education is a great asset. And thank you everyone for joining tonight. That would be the end of our session.